Okay, what if I told you that the laws of physics, the engine of evolution, and even our deepest sense of right and wrong weren't separate things at all? What if they were all just different expressions of one single fundamental principle? Well, that's the absolutely mind-bending idea we're diving into today, the Lagos field hypothesis. But before we get there, let's start with a question we've all probably wondered about at some point. Is this whole thing, the stars, life, consciousness, is it all just one big chaotic accident? Is reality just a bunch of random stuff happening with no real meaning or direction? Well, the Lagos field hypothesis looks at that question and says, absolutely not. It suggests the universe isn't chaotic in the slightest. Instead, it argues that the most basic principle of everything is something called coherence. It's this idea that there's a kind of universal field that's always pushing things toward order, whether that's atoms arranging themselves into a perfect crystal or a flock of birds moving together as if they share one mind. And, the author of this hypothesis, Skylar Fiction, really nails it with this one line. The universe is not a chaotic accident, but an ongoing act of coherence. Just let that sink in. That one idea changes everything. It reframes reality not as a random mess, but as an active, almost intelligent process. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to break down what this Lagos field actually is. Then we'll see how it shows up in the basic rules of physics, how it sparks into life and consciousness, and then, this is the big one, how it might even be the foundation for our ethics. And by the end, we'll ask what it all means to live in a universe that seems to be waking up and understanding itself. All right, let's jump right in. Before we can get to the really wild stuff, we have to get a handle on the core concept here, this idea of coherence being the absolute bedrock of reality. So what do we even mean by coherence? Well, the hypothesis defines it as the match, the alignment between a system's internal model and what's actually happening in the outside world. A star exists because it's coherent with the laws of physics. A cell in your body stays alive because its internal workings are a good model of its environment. And this leads to a really powerful statement. To be is to be coherent. Think about it. When a star loses that balance between gravity and fusion, it blows up. When an animal can no longer predict where food is, it starves. The moment a system loses its coherence, it's gone. It just stops existing. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This one principle, coherence, apparently shows up in totally different ways. In the world of physics, it looks like law, the elegant, symmetrical rules that run the cosmos. In biology, it takes a step up and becomes life, the ability of a living thing to predict its world so it can survive and adapt. And then comes the most radical jump. In the human world, that same drive for coherence becomes what the author calls love. And we're not just talking about a romantic feeling here. We're talking about the deep alignment between minds, the truth and empathy that allows a society to function. It's the same principle, just operating at a whole new level of complexity. Okay, let's drill down to the most fundamental level, the grammar of physics. The hypothesis argues that this is where coherence first starts writing the rules for everything else. To explain this, the author comes up with this cool idea called the coherence density metric, or CD. Here's a simple way to think about it. Imagine a piece of software. A really clunky, badly written program might need thousands of lines of code just to do something simple. That's low coherence density. But a truly elegant piece of code, it can do something incredibly powerful and complex with just a few simple lines. That's high coherence density. And the theory is the universe itself seems to prefer that elegant compressed code, like E equals mc squared. And when you look at the history of physics, like we see in this table, you can see what the author calls the arc of coherence. It's this clear pattern. We didn't just discover more physical laws over time. We discovered better ones, laws that were simpler, more fundamental, and way more powerful. It's almost as if the universe has been slowly revealing its elegant source code to us, one update at a time. Okay, so coherence sets the stage in physics, but now for the really amazing jump. What happens when that principle of coherence becomes alive and then becomes aware? Let's talk about life, mind, and prediction. The bridge here is a concept from neuroscience called the free energy principle. Now that sounds super technical, but the core idea is actually pretty simple. It's that any living thing that manages to stick around, from a single cell all the way up to us, has to constantly work to minimize surprise. It's all about closing the gap between what you expect to happen and what actually happens. Your body does it without you even thinking. It predicts you're going to need fuel, so you feel hungry. It predicts you're about to get too hot, so you start to sweat. Survival is basically just a game of staying one step ahead of reality. So you end up with this amazing continuum of prediction. You start at the bottom with physics, where coherence just creates a stable, predictable structure for things to happen in. Then, building on top of that, you get biology, which uses that predictability to actively survive and adapt. And then, at the very top, you get the mind, which takes prediction to a whole new level. It starts making models not just of the world, but of itself. And that's where you get self-awareness. It's all just one unbroken chain of getting better and better at predicting things. To make it really clear, just look at this comparison. A star is a pretty simple, coherent system, right? It just kind of sits there, passively following the laws of physics to keep itself stable. But a single neuron? It's unbelievably complex. It doesn't just sit there. It actively builds models, it fires off predictions, it updates itself constantly based on new data. That's the huge leap from passive order to active, intelligent order. All right, you might want to buckle up for this next part, because this is where the hypothesis makes its boldest, most provocative claim. We're heading into section 4, the ethics of coherence, or what you could almost call the physics of right and wrong. So we've all heard of entropy, right? It's that tendency for things to fall apart, for a hot cup of coffee to cool down, or a clean room to get messy. It's the universe's slide towards disorder. Well, this theory introduces a new kind of entropy, relational entropy. This is the informational chaos and instability that happens between people. And it's driven by things that destroy coherence, like lies, betrayal, and deception. So think about how this plays out in a society. When people tell the truth and cooperate, they reduce that relational chaos. Our mental models of each other align, and that creates trust and stability. But on the other hand, things like deception and exploitation, they crank up the chaos. They cause our models to misalign, creating mistrust, instability, and eventually breakdown. And this leads to a pretty incredible conclusion. Morality might not be just a set of social rules we made up. According to this, it could be a fundamental law of informational physics, a basic requirement for building a stable, low-entropy society that lasts. And this brings us to a really simple but kind of profound idea. In this way of looking at things, love, and again, we're defining that as deep empathy, truth, and seeing each other clearly. Love is the ultimate state of coherence between two minds. It's the point of maximum alignment and minimum relational chaos. It's literally the most stable, efficient, and coherent way for intelligent beings to connect. Okay, time for our final section. Let's pull all these pieces together, from physics to life to love, and see what kind of big picture story this hypothesis is telling us about the universe and our place in it. This is the cosmic story of coherence. The author wraps this whole cosmic narrative up into 3 acts, using terms that might sound a little theological, but they're really just describing universal jobs that coherence does. First up is lambda, or creation. That's the initial act of setting up the predictable rules of the game. Then there's theta, or providence. That's the ongoing work of maintaining order and pushing back against the constant pull of entropy. And finally, there's omega, or redemption. That's the amazing process that can restore and rebuild coherence even after a system breaks down. So, after all that, what are we supposed to take away from this? Well, a few big things. First, that maybe reality is fundamentally about information and meaning, not just stuff. Second, that physics, life, and ethics might not be separate subjects at all, but just different scales of the exact same process. Third, that meaning isn't just some fuzzy feeling in our heads. It could be an objective measure of how well our own internal models are aligned with the way things really are. And maybe the biggest idea of all, that the universe, through conscious beings like us, is literally in the process of waking up and understanding itself. We're going to end with this last really powerful line from the source material. It's a heck of a thought to leave you with, and maybe a whole new way of looking at the world around you. If there's any truth to this hypothesis, then coherence is the silent, universal language of existence. The Logos field speaks in everything that endures.